Hello, Creative Writing. I wanted to make a quick video for our lesson today, just so it's easier for us to not have me cut out. Okay, our focus today is called Raising the Curtain, and more specifically, this is how to start off your stories. Now, this can apply to short stories as well as novels or any of that stuff, okay? But let's take a look at some of these things. I don't know how many of you guys have ever started reading a story, but oftentimes for me anymore, I have so many books that I need to read that if I can't get into it, I'll usually give it a chapter or two, but if I don't get into a story kind of from the beginning, or I don't have a sense that it's going to get better, um, I usually lose interest. And I think that's true for a lot of people. So more and more, um, if you are interested in actually learning to publish and make a career of this, which some of you might, this is an important skill to develop. Okay. So you want to think about when you start your story off that you're making kind of a contract with your readership, um, even a promise. So what that means is you don't have to reveal everything. I mean, you don't want to, but your readers should get a sense that when I'm reading this, I have an idea of how the story is going to play out. Okay, so for instance, you should know from the first few paragraphs or chapter if this is going to be a serious story. Is it going to have some humorous components to it? Is it going to be farcical? Is it going to be ironic? Okay, all that stuff should be made apparent from the very beginning. Okay, and ultimately, you're trying to convince your reader to keep reading. Um, this applies to fiction as well as nonfiction. I read a book a few years ago called Surviving Your Stupid, Stupid, Stupid Decision to Get a Master's Degree. Um, and it was very comical the whole time. It was instructive, but, part of the reason I kept reading and have interest in it is, even from the title, it took this idea of I'm going into a master's degree and they made a joke of it. Okay. Um, let's take a look at something here really fast. Okay, so one thing that you want to avoid is gimmicks right at the beginning. Okay, so let me pull up this thing. So he says, I overheard writer Jeffrey Wolf say no cheap tricks to a group of writing students. That should go on a 3x5 card. I amend it a little. No tricks, period. I hate tricks. At the first sign of a trick or a gimmick in a piece of fiction, a cheap trick or even an elaborate trick, I tend to look for cover. Tricks are ultimately boring and I get bored easily. Extremely clever, cheechy writing or just plain tomfoolery writing puts me to sleep. Writers don't need tricks or gimmicks or even necessarily need to be the smartest fellow on the block. At the risk of appearing foolish, a writer sometimes needs to be able to just stand and gape at this thing or that thing, a sunset in an old shoe, and an absolute and with simple amazement. Okay? So, when you're writing a story, I think how we can translate that for our own purposes is you don't need to hook your readers with, again, some gimmick or promise that you're not really going to fulfill very well. I've had many a times that I'll read a book and I'll have an idea that's going to be awesome, and then partway through the middle or even in the end, I'm just severely disappointed, and I feel like it didn't deliver on what on what it led me to. Now, granted, we'll talk about developing your stories further in the trimester, but um, you want to make sure that what you start is how you intend to deliver at the end. Okay. All right. So a few characteristics of a good opening, guys. You want to keep the reader wondering what's going to happen next. You want them to get to the end and want to keep reading. Like we just talked about, you want to establish a tone of the piece. Okay. Again, is it ironic, farcical, satirical, all that stuff. You want to give a reader a little bit of a background, immerse the reader in the physical world. And this is something that you can do throughout the book, but you especially want to maybe start off that way. Okay. Other things that you could do is you introduce the characters in the situation. Okay. You want to get them acclimated to what's going on. So we'll look at some of these more in depth here. You want to help the reader know what's going to happen next. Okay? Not next, sorry. I'll fix that. Does your reader want to know what happens next? Okay, if they don't have that question, they're probably not going to keep reading. You want to establish the tone of the piece. I'm going to maybe revise this a little bit. I don't think you have to, lay it on too thick in the beginning, but you want to do it thick enough that a person can get a sense of, again, what the piece is going to be. What feeling or mood do you want your readers to take from the piece should be apparent from the very first sentence. Okay, we're going to look at a few examples of how that will play out later this week. All right, this again is important, is immerse the reader in the physical world of the piece. I think in sci-fi, one thing I struggle, like I don't always love sci-fi fiction because I feel like it takes me too long to get acclimated to things. And I know some people love that. But I think in any writing, especially in sci-fi, it's important that you help get the reader early on a sense of what's going on in the world. Okay, I read a Dan Simmons book once called Hyperion, and it took me a long time to really kind of figure out what was going on. But there were still elements in there that kept my interest and kept me going, and I ended up really liking the series by the end of it. But it took me a while to get into it. So I would just say this is a careful, important thing that you need to learn to develop. Okay, think about where a piece takes place, and that doesn't mean you have to be explicit on all this stuff the whole way. Think about at what point in time you want something to take place. What is the physical terrain? Are you in a house? Are you in a boat in the open sea? Are you in the mountains? Are you in Siberia? Okay, suburbia. Sorry. That should also be, I would say you want to establish that fairly early as well, okay? You want to introduce characters and situations. Now, this formula I'm giving you guys doesn't mean that you have to do all these things like right at the beginning, but you want to do it fairly early, and you want to establish these things at some point, okay? Who are we finding out about, or who are we going on a journey with? What is their particular situation? We talk about character being the main hinge pin in driving a plot forward. This is something you want to establish and probably establish early. We're going to see some examples of this as well. What exactly is happening that should cause us to be interested? Okay, this can be background information as well. Another thing, you want to think about the opening in terms of balance. Okay, I love that picture. Everything can either be out of kilter or it soon will be. That something is going to cause a little ripple or a huge rift in a character's life. Some missing link, perhaps, that will lead to their happiness or prevents them from getting what they want. Okay? And sometimes they don't know what they want until they learn about it earlier on. Okay? So here's some great examples. There's one from Henry James called Four's Meeting, King of the Bingo Game, and then Mauser. Okay, think about how these characters in these opening paragraphs create this equilibrium. And what that means is you want to feel like things are level again. Okay, it feels like the world's chaotic. You want things to level off. Okay, that's where equilibrium comes in. Another thing that you might consider doing when you start a story is start in the middle. Okay, a lot of great movies and stories that I know of start in the middle of things. Okay, here's a few examples. I've talked about Maverick with you guys. Okay, that starts off with the character having a noose hung around his neck and he's sitting on a horse. And he said, how did I get to this point? And then it flashes back, and about halfway through the movie it goes on from there, how he escapes. Forrest Gump starts in the middle, if you've seen that. Pulp Fiction, Fight Club. Batman Begins also starts in the middle. Okay, then we go back and kind of get flashback with him. Slumdog Millionaire as well. Megamind, Captain America, The First Avenger, John Wick, 12 Years a Slave. These are all great films. There's great novels that do the same thing. It's a nice way to get people interested in and seeing, how do I get to this point? We can also see this where you can kind of start at the end. There's a great episode of Breaking Bad where Walter White, you see, starts off lying on the floor, bloody and beaten up, and you're interested to see in the episode, how did he come to that point? How did he get there? And the whole time you're kind of trying to make connections to these string of events, and it almost seems like it won't happen, and then it does. Okay, so again, great ways to create interest is start right in the middle of the action. Okay. Here's a little mnemonic device. You can start the ABCDE pattern. Okay, you don't have to follow these emphatically, but these are certainly some elements that you want to include. Start with some sort of action. Start with backstory. Have a conflict right from the beginning. Denouement. Okay, I think I'm saying that right. What that means is maybe kind of a wrapping up idea. Okay, so it could be at the end. Or you could start with the ending. Okay, so this would be almost at the ending, and this is where you could be at the ending. Okay. Again, you don't have to do this all formulaic and do it in this order, certainly, but these are certainly ideas to start with. Let's look at Murphy's Christmas here. Okay. Murphy's drunk on the bright verge of a still another Christmas, and a car door slams. Then he's out in the headlights and in bed, waking up in the next afternoon with Annie kissing his crucified right fist. It's blue and swollen, and when he tries to move it, it tingles, it pains, and then he says, "How did you hurt your hand? Did you hit somebody?" Murphy waits while that question fades on her mouth. Then the room glitters, and he sniffs in the old fracture acid of remorse, asking, "Was I sick?" "Yes." "Where?" "On the floor. And you fell out of bed twice. It was terrible. I don't think I could stand it if it happened again. Promise me you won't get drunk anymore. Glover had to teach both of your classes, as Morton. You frighten me when you're this way, and you've lost so much weight, and you should have seen yourself last night naked on the floor, like something from the concentration camp in your own vomit, and you were so white, you were blue." Is the color of Annie's eyes as Murphy sinks into the stars and splinters of a sheet with her? Okay, we'll stop there. Okay. All right, so the idea here, guys, is the story starts off, and we do get a little backstory. We learn that Murphy is probably a teacher, but also that he had some altercation. No explanation of what is given of it, okay? But he stops, and we kind of hear what happened to him the previous night. You know, for me, this is something that, again, I would be interested in knowing more of what the story would be, okay? Another idea is sometimes you can give an emotional state of the character. So we'll look at one more. So this is from Raymond Carver, Cathedral. This is one of my favorite short stories. Okay, so here's another beginning. The blind man, an old friend of my wife's, he was on his way to spend the night. His wife had died, so he was visiting the dead wife's relatives in Connecticut. He called his wife from his in-laws. Arrangements were made. He would come by train, a 5-hour trip, and his wife would meet him at the station. She hadn't seen him since she worked for him one summer in Seattle 10 years ago, but she and the blind man kept in touch. They made tapes and mailed them back and forth. I wasn't enthusiastic about his visit. He was no one I knew, and his being blind bothered me. My idea of blindness came from the movies. In the movies, the blind man moved slowly and never laughed. Sometimes they were led by seeing eye dogs. A blind man in my house was not something I looked forward to. Okay, so here we get a really good emotional state of our character, where he's at, what sort of conflict is about to happen. We get a little backstory with his wife, okay? But there's not a lot of action happening here, but again, we do get into the mind of the character, which I think is important, okay? There's a few other ones that you can certainly look at on here. You want to create suspense. Okay, we've talked about this a little bit, but this is a mental uncertainty. You can feel pleasant excitement at the decision or outcome. I think this is, again, concern with what's going to happen next. Okay, here's a few examples that you might look at. Okay, but again, this idea is you want to make your reader want to know what's going to happen. Okay, and you can do this by using cliffhangers. Okay, again, that can be a little gimmicky, but make them feel like they want to move on. Okay, you guys, as a last activity that I would like you to do tonight, okay, or after this lecture, I have a link here for introductions to stories, and I've chosen 7 stories that I've liked. Some of them you might recognize, some of them not. I didn't give you the names of any of them, but what I'd like you to do is on that document, I want you to read through these, okay? I want you to consider, first of all, what kind of tone the story has. You know, just from a first reading, what can you expect from this story, okay? And I think these stories really deliver on what they promise, okay? Think about what kind of background information are you given? What things, what your appetite, what do you learn about the characters or the situation, okay? I want you to think about what kind of action is being presented. Also, importantly, think about what's the setting like? What is the situation that we're in? What is the beliefs of the characters, okay? So setting doesn't only have to be it's taking place in, you know, the Arctic. It could be what is the belief system of these characters, okay? So I think this is important. I think this is as an exercise, this will help you develop your own introductions. We will have some more exercises this week, but give these a go, and hopefully you enjoy that exercise. All right, thank you guys.